What's up guys, welcome to another Ask Elvis video, and massive thank you to all of you who took the time to write a comment or ask a question this week. I have had hundreds, if not into the thousands, of comments on the YouTube channel, Twitter, Instagram, so many, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate them all. I've been through, I think, all of them, if not all of them, very close to all of them, and I've read them all. And you know, I've at least tried to acknowledge that by at least hitting like. That's not just me flicking through, hitting like all the way through. I am reading them all, I promise you, because for me, if you're going to take the time to write the comment, the least I can do is take the time to read it. So I appreciate them all. Keep them coming. It's great. I love it. I enjoy it. And because of that, we've got hopefully a great Ask Elvis today. So let's get into it. Roll the sting. Right, let's start with this one from A. Guled, who says, what have you made of McLaren? Have they constructed a car capable of being developed to be the best of the rest? Well, second part of that question, have they got a car capable of being developed? I guess we don't know yet. Nobody knows that yet, because that's something that happens in the future. The one thing I would say on that is that everybody this year has a bit more scope for development because of all the new regulations. So things like front wings, rear wings, barge board areas are going to be areas that have massive amounts of development. Brake ducts, all the things that have been affected by the new regulations mean that they're in the earliest part of their development path, aren't they? If you keep a set of regulations stable, as the years go on, the law of diminishing returns means that the development potential in each of those areas gets smaller and smaller. But right now, we're at the start of a development phase of lots of areas of this car. So I suspect McLaren and others have loads of scope to move further forward in that sense. What have I made of McLaren? Again, as I said the other day, let's not read too much into lap times. They banged in a couple of quick lap times earlier in the week in both tests, didn't they? But I think the bigger thing for me is, and this is just what I've seen from driver interviews and that kind of thing, but also from talking to people at McLaren, which I have do on a regular basis, there's a definite air of positivity. They are much happier at this point in the season than they have been for a number of seasons. I think they all believe they've got a car that, whether it's going to be best of the rest, I don't think it is right now. I don't think it necessarily is at the start of the season, but they're in a far better place. They've got a reliable car, and that's something they've struggled with at the start of the season for a long, long time. And that means you've got a platform that you can then push forward towards performance with. And I think the fact that everyone's feeling a bit more positive, you know, that's a team that have been a bit depressed over the last few years, if we're honest, because, you know, you do. When you've had such a long run of poor results, of course it gets you down. And if you start the season having had, you know, pre-season testing full of engine changes and you know, time in the garage and not out on the racetrack, it gets you down, it sets you up terribly for the season ahead. That's not happening this time around. Things are much more positive, people are happy, people are excited about the season, and it's great to see that at McLaren. Victor Rusu says, how much information do drivers and teams really get about the understanding of the tyres at this early stage? Well, Victor, loads, you know, really, really loads. That's one of the biggest areas of pre-season testing that teams are trying to work through. It's trying to understand the new tyres, how those new tyres work on their car. And obviously that will start to change in different temperatures and at different circuits. But what they can do is build up a real big baseline set of data. And from that, they can use that as a reference when the temperature goes up, for example, track and ambient temperatures. They can start to adjust the setup and the way they operate their car to cope based on what they've learned from Barcelona. So every team will be doing that, and it's been a huge part of it. So yeah, loads and loads of data collected about the tyres, about the way they warm up, about the sweet spot, the temperature window, how small is that window, how critical is it to be in it. You know, how many laps can you do before that performance starts to drop away? So all of those things will have been very high up on the agenda of everybody's run plan. So yeah, massive amount of data collected on those. Elfwold says, considering how cool it is in Europe in winter, how does that compromise the team's understanding of any potential cooling problems on the car? Well, it wasn't that cool, was it, this time around? Last year, much more so. We had snow in Barcelona for pre-season testing. But yes, it's cooler than some countries to go to, of course. And again, what the teams do is use what they've learnt here as a reference, as a baseline. And in terms of how much they need to open up the cooling on their bodywork, for example, they will have tested some of that. And of course, you know, if they open up the bodywork by a little bit, by a percentage point, how much of a change to the engine temperature or the power unit temperature or the gearbox temperature do those things make a difference? So all of those things will have been learnt as well over the course of this test, and they'll already have an awful lot of info on that through things like CFD and factory-based testing. But yeah, the testing program will have been used to factor in an awful lot of that. The engine guys, the guys from each engine manufacturer, that's exactly the kind of thing they will have been working on. How does their engine or their power unit perform in certain temperatures? When they change the settings, when they ramp that up to quali mode, how does that affect the temperatures when it's running at higher power? How long can they do that for? That sort of stuff's all been calculated. So it doesn't hamper them very much, is the answer to your question. Nino Monti, do you think the cars will be faster or slower with the new aero packages? Undoubtedly faster. We've already seen a huge amount of work in the new cars, in the new aero packages, to overcome some of the things that were lost, in terms of lost downforce, in terms of lost flow control around the front tyres. I think they may well be, quicker at the start of the season, but if they're not on day one, they certainly will be. I'd say by about race 4, by the time we get back to Europe for sure, when we get the big update packages at Barcelona, I think we'll be taking giant leaps forward, smashing lap records every track we go to. Cutting Edge Retro says, do you think, given the amazing pace of the Ferrari, that Charles Leclerc has the real potential to disrupt Vettel's dream of becoming a world champion in a Ferrari? I absolutely do. Absolutely do. I think that's one of the most interesting battles we're going to see this year. It's not really the battle between Sebastian and Lewis. It's going to be the battle between Sebastian and Charles Leclerc, and that's one that's really captures the imagination, doesn't it? Because I know that the team have said they will focus on Seb in the early races. You can focus on Seb as much as you like, but if Charles Leclerc is quicker or as quick, it will start to disrupt Sebastian Vettel. We know that he has weaknesses. He has weaknesses in his game, often around the emotional side. Much more so. He's not short of talent, we know that, but the emotional side is his weakness. We've seen Lewis exploit that in the past. I just wonder what Charles Leclerc has up his sleeve to try and get his nose in front of Sebastian. But absolutely, I think he has the potential to do that, and I can't wait to see if he can do it, if he can manage to pull it off. Simply People says, why do the Ferrari engines run with a single wastegate this season whilst all the other non-Ferrari power units have 2? And when did this rule change? Right, well, it isn't a rule change. This is just simply a kind of configuration that Ferrari have gone with. And I think actually they only came up with that in the second test from memory. So it's just something they tried. Now, there's no rule one way or the other. You have to have a wastegate, but you can have one tailpipe, and that's what Ferrari have done. I think if there's any advantage one way or the other, it will be minuscule, because if there was an advantage one way or the other, everybody would be doing the same thing. I think the advantage is more, if there is one for Ferrari, it might be a packaging thing. By having one tailpipe, maybe it gives you the opportunity to slim bodywork down around the area a little bit more, perhaps. So yeah, I don't think there's a big deal in it. I think it's just a preference that Ferrari have gone with. Axis 3 Design says, hi Mark, can you please explain about the driver's weight, 80 kilos for 2019? I don't get it. Keep up the awesome work you're doing. We will be there always. Cheers. Thank you very much. So new for 19 then is this difference in weight. So the overall car weight has gone up a little bit, I think 7 kilos from memory. 740 kilos now for a dry weight of the car. So when we talk about dry weight, we're talking about a fully built up car with wheels and bodywork on, but with no fuel. Now the driver the driver used to be incorporated in the total weight of the car. For this year, the overall weight has a driver weight of 80 kilos factored in. So whatever the driver actually weighs, if he weighs 70 kilos, which lots of them do around that sort of area, well then they all have to have ballast to bring them up to 80 kilos. Now in the past, if you had a 70 kilo driver or a lightweight driver, you could add that ballast wherever you wanted it around the car. So it was an advantage to a team to have a lightweight driver because you could then place the ballast in somewhere that would give you a performance advantage. And that was forcing drivers to then desperately go on weight-saving programs, potentially putting their health at risk. So now 80 kilos will include the driver and his seat, no matter who you are, no matter what you weigh. So if your driver weighs 70 kilos, you have to run 10 kilos of ballast, and it has to go in a place in the cockpit right next to the seat. So everybody will have that in the same place. So every car will have 80 kilos at the point where the driver and the seat sits in the car. Whether you have a 70 kilo driver or an 80 kilo driver, there will always be 80 kilos in that zone. And that levels the playing field in that regard. And it means that drivers are less forced to go on desperate weight-saving measures to try and bring an advantage to the team. There were cases in the past where the team have been putting pressure on drivers to lose weight because it brings an advantage to the car. So that's why they've done it. Utterly sensible, makes perfect sense to me. A team can still, save weight in other areas of their car, and they can, if they manage to get below the minimum weight limit, they can still place ballast in the other designated points on the car, but not from a driver's perspective. So I hope that makes sense. But to me, it seems like a very sensible change. Archer Wark says, when the teams are testing, do they set the car up for the track they're testing on, or do they set the car up for other tracks that they'll be going to during the year? That's a sensible question. A few people have asked me that sort of thing. What they'll do is they will set the car up for, in this case, Barcelona. So they will have a Barcelona setup on the car. They will go round on the first day, fine-tuning that setup to find a good baseline. So the car's handling well, so the driver's happy, he's comfortable, he's got a good balance within his car. Once they've got that baseline set up, that becomes their reference. So then if they start changing whatever it might be, aero settings, suspension settings on the car, camber settings, whatever they want to go through in their run program, they can do that, and then they can always switch back to the reference setup, the baseline setup, to compare the feeling from a driver's perspective of what they've just tested and what the car runs like under baseline conditions. And at different temperature conditions, different weather conditions over the course of the week, they will continue to do baseline runs just to get in the driver's mind what the car feels like on its baseline setup, and then they'll go through the changes again. So they've constantly got a reference to work back to. That's what they do. Pete Chadwick says, a couple of questions. Do you think power unit manufacturers allow customers to use all the modes available to them, or do they hold back special switch position combinations to get extra modes? Secondly, how do teams know if there is development potential in a car? Right, so the first one of those, power unit modes have to be delivered from a manufacturer to a customer the same as they will be for the manufacturer's car. So if you're Mercedes and you're supplying Williams, you have to give them the same hardware as your Mercedes factory car, but you also have to give them the same software. You have to give them the ability to run the same modes that you as an engine supplier can also run. That's in the regulation, so you have to do that. In terms of how do teams know what their development potential is, well, the truth is they don't really. I mean, as I said at the beginning, with this year we've got quite a bit more development potential in certain areas because they're all new, but you will try to create a car. When you create any new car at the start of every season, by its nature it's new, and that means that you haven't had years of development on that car, so there's always development potential in it. Whether the car responds to that development in the way that you think it will, well, no one really knows that. Because its development hasn't happened yet. That's things in the future. That's a future development path that you think you're going to be able to go down. You hope for all those things, but you don't really know. So the truth is no one really knows if a car has development potential. I think if it's quick out the box, You know, if on day one you've got a very quick, stable car, that's a great sign, because you've got a great baseline, and from there you can start to work up and develop, I guess, a bit more performance from it. If on day one you've got a car that is all over the place and you're struggling to get a lap time out of it, if you're having to push it to the absolute limit to get the kind of lap times that your rivals are kind of doing with ease, well, then you're in a bit more trouble, aren't you? You've got, you're already pushing the car as far as you think you dare as a driver to achieve a lap time. So in that sense, you can have an idea, but in terms from a design perspective, knowing its potential, it's a bit of an unknown. Stefan78 says, can you solve a German mystery? Right, I've seen this picture floating about a little bit. This happened, I think, either at the beginning of week 2, didn't it, or at the end of week 1, I can't remember. But yes, I saw this brought to my attention. This is the back of the Red Bull, and what Stefan's talking about is the two silver struts, diagonal struts that you can see coming down from the exhaust and down to the floor on the outboard section. Very obvious diagonal silver struts. You see what I'm talking about. And there was a lot of debate about what they were for, and I saw some really wild theories going on Twitter, which made me chuckle. Look, I don't know 100%. I don't know. I haven't spoken to anyone at Red Bull. I haven't got an answer out of Red Bull. My theory on that is that it's about floor stability. I think the floor was flexing on the Red Bull at speed, and I think they needed to find ways to stop that flex from happening, because you are allowed a certain amount of flex. You know, every component flexes a certain amount, and we know that teams, and actually we know Red Bull, have pushed those limits in the past in terms of wing flex, that kind of thing, and the same thing, I guess, with floors. If you can get that floor to flex a little bit, you potentially increase the performance of your diffuser, because you start to create a kind of almost an arched type section on the floor if the outboard edges will drop down at high speed. So you're not allowed to have that happen. There are deflection tests where the FIA will come along and put weights on certain points on the floor, and it's only allowed to deflect a certain amount. So anyway, that's the situation. I suspect, and the reason I suspect this, because I also saw this picture floating around, which is also at the back of the Red Bull, and you can see there's a little blue circle highlighting those two little white squares, and there's lots of those little squares if you look around all over the diffuser, the end plates, and around the back of the floor. Now those little squares are used when the team put a camera, one of their own cameras, pointing at those areas, and they're able to measure those little white squares and how much they deflect at speed. So they'll put a camera on the back of the car, send the car out for a run, come back, they can use those little white squares as a reference and see how much they've moved, and therefore you can judge what the deflection is at certain parts of the floor at different speeds. So putting those two pieces of information together, the solid silver struts and the little white stickers on the back of the car, I'm going to say that they had some deflection issues or flexure issues on the back of that floor, and they wanted to try and stiffen it up, but probably just in a temporary fashion at first, whilst they measured it. And because the outboard edge of the floor, there's nowhere really that you can brace it from, is there? Because there's nothing substantial on the outboard edges to attach a stay to, and actually probably that exhaust mount is one of the most solid things and as close to the rear of the floor as you can get it. So I suspect that is probably what it's for, but that's just speculation, but that would be my theory. Right, that is about all we got time for this week. Loads of questions. I hope that hasn't gone on for too long, but I hope they're interesting questions. Well, they were definitely interesting questions. I hope they were interesting answers. I'm recording this on Sunday night, as you can maybe see, because it's pitch black out the window behind me. And that is because by the time this actually goes live on Monday, I'll be in Brussels. Got quite a busy week coming up this week, so I'm trying to slot some things into the gaps in preparation for me being away at various times. For those of you who are asking about me coming to Amsterdam at the end of this coming week for the book launch and book signings, I'll pop details on Twitter for that tomorrow or today, because it'll be Monday when you see this. So hopefully by the time you see this, actually those details will be up. So I'd love to see as many as you can who are in or around Amsterdam. If you want to come down, that'd be awesome. I'd love to see you there. But look, thanks again guys. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you have a good week, and I'll see you tomorrow.